Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event this evening with John Kruth in conversation with Pat Thomas, discussing Hold On World, the lasting impact of John Lennon and Yoko Ono's plastic Ono Band 50 years on. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is Tuesday, August 10th with Melissa Broder discussing Super Doom selected poems. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads Hold On World directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo for those who are interested. If you'd like to ask a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question button box at the bottom of the screen. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. So a little more about John. John is a singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and the author of 3 musical biographies, including To Lives to Fly, The Ballad of the Late Great Townes Van Sant, and Rhapsody in Black, The Life and Music of Roy Orbison. In 2015, Backbeat Books, wow, Backbeat Books.
Say that 3 times fast.
Published Kruth's 50th anniversary celebration of the Beatles' Rubber Soul, The Bird Has Flown. His book, A Friend of the Devil, The Glorification of the Outlaw in Song, From Robin Hood to Rap, was published in September 2010 by Backbeat. Kruth's writing has appeared in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Wire, The Observer, No Depression, Rave, Wax Poetic, and Folk Roots. A little more about Pat. Pat has appeared on the BBC and NPR as the author of Listen, Whitey. He was a consultant on the PBS documentary, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution. He has lectured at USC, Evergreen State, and the universities of Copenhagen, Oslo, and East London. He's also the author of Did It, Jerry Rubin, an American Revolutionary. He co-curated the book, Invitation to Openness, The Jazz and Soul Photography of Les McCann, from 1960-1980, and compiled the Allen Ginsberg box set, The Last Word on First Blues. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to John and Pat. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I think this is, I've done a lot of events in person at Book Soup. This is my first Book Soup Zoomy type thing. John and I have known each other for a few years. We first met at Cantor's, had breakfast, and it was a breakfast that lasted at least 4 hours. And at the end of the 4 hours, John invited me to play bongos with him. And so 2 days later, I was playing bongos on stage with John. Long before I met John, I read his Roland Kirk biography. That's very interesting. So, we got a lot to talk about. This is an album that I first heard when I was 18. And I'd already listened to all the other, Beatles albums, and I'd heard a lot of McCartney solo stuff, a lot of Wings and stuff. And it just, the visceral quality of this album. I discovered this album around the same time I discovered the first Modern Lovers album. Couple years earlier, I'd heard Lou Reed's Berlin, Neil Young's On the Beach. When I think of this album, Big Star Third, this is one of those great sort of nervous breakdown albums. As I got a little older, I realized it came from some Primal Scheme therapy. And there's really nothing else like it in the entire Beatles related catalog. There's not really a McCartney nervous breakdown album. Not even a George one. So let's just kind of start with how you got inspired to do this book.
Sure. Well, I was a Beatles fan from day one since I saw them February 9th, 1964 on Ed Sullivan. And it really changed my life. I had already been playing some guitar. I knew some folk songs, and my sister had some Bob Dylan records and all of that. And so I followed the whole thing in real time.
Sure.
And every release really was like a major missive to me. You know, I was waiting for every album to come out.
So how old are you in 1970 when this album comes out?
I was 15 and I was in Miami Beach. I went down to see my brother who was going to college there.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a Pontiac with an 8-track tape player in it. And we smoked some pot and went for a drive in the car and listened to it. And it was, wow, it was just stunning. I mean, it was like somebody threw a bucket of cold water on me, or, you know, or pulled my pants down in class or something. I mean, it was just some kind of like real intense experience. And I mean, we listened to it more than once, you know, we listened to it over and over, and it was shocking. And I didn't hear the Yoko record right away. That came probably within a year. I didn't realize that there were 2 records at the same time.
Sure.
But the John record was absolutely stunning. And then, of course, there was the interview with Jan Wenner in Rolling Stone, which followed right away, right after it.
Yeah, the legendary Lennon Remembers.
And that was
a bit later came out as a separate paperback book.
Yeah, and that was just absolutely shocking and stunning. Now, I already was in their camp right away.
Right.
I was in the John and Yoko camp pretty early on because I had grown up in a family where my mother was a painter. I went to the Museum of Modern Art. I was really interested in conceptual art and minimalism, and going to the museum in New York and actually reading Art Forum. And so, you know, the whole idea of Yoko being this conceptual artist, it really intrigued me.
Right. Let's just fast forward, though, you know, almost 50 years later or so, that like what inspired you to finally do this? Like, you know, why now?
Well, I was really lucky to work with Hal Wilner and to know Hal Wilner and to spend time with him, collaborate with him. And I interviewed Hal a number of times. And one of the times that I interviewed him for was for Wire magazine. And of course, you know, it's a cold thing. You drop, you drop a needle on a record, or you play
the invisible jukebox. For those who don't know, people, one person plays another person a song, series of songs, but doesn't say what it is. And the person kind of talks about it. Usually they guess, but they don't always get it right.
And he was pretty much bulletproof.
Yeah. Downbeat did it called Blindfold Test. Wire magazine's done it.
Right. So one of the pieces,
everything you were playing, more or less, right?
One of the pieces that I dropped was Life with the Lions, John and Yoko, Cambridge, 1969. And he knew what it was from the first note, of course. And we started talking about John's guitar playing and just the power of that record. And we both agreed that for both of us, it was an amazing, visceral, powerful experience. And I joked, of course, and told him that I used to use it to clear out my dorm room when the party was over.
Right.
But as a guitarist myself, I was just stunned by what John was doing. And then I also have always had the ability, whether I like music or not, or whether I like the sound of something or not, to be able to see beyond my own tastes.
Sure.
And I thought that what Yoko was doing was, I was already familiar with Albert Ayler and John Coltrane, free jazz, all that really powerful stuff.
Right.
And so I had a context for it. I understood what it was about.
Mm-hmm. Right, but
so I had just finished the book before this, which was called A Friend of the Devil, the glorification of the outlaw in Western song from Robin Hood to rap. And that was brought about because of my interviews during my book on Townes Van Zandt. It seemed that I had collected all of these really great interviews about the outlaw song form. And so I had written that, and then it was like, okay, well, where am I going to go with this? And I wanted to do a book, and I still do want to do a book on Ornette Coleman, who I was lucky enough to know and get to play with a number of times and interview. And so I was looking to do a thing on Ornette, and the publisher was like, well, I can't really do that. I don't think I could sell a book on Ornette. And I was just looking for something that was a departure from everything that I had written before, that was like really, even though I had written a book on Rubber Soul, I see this as a more almost, even though John's record isn't a free jazz record, it has the power and intensity of Albert Ayler. And I thought, well, maybe if I do these two together, you know, I can kind of like go for that. And so that was part of it. And what really sealed the deal was talking with Wilner about it, because I wound up having conversations with Hal about music, whether it was something he was doing or not. I would just call him, and if he had time, if he was at an airport or something like that, you know, we might talk about it. And I was like, well, what did you think about, you know, maybe doing this thing on both of the albums combined? And Hal thought it was a great idea. And Mr. Wilner to me was you know, a bit of a mentor, and certainly, you know, his word meant a lot. And so I started kicking that around, you know. I mean, the thing that's funny is that I wrote about both of these records at the same time, not like, oh, do John's and then do Yoko's.
Right. Just why don't you, for those who are just turning, why don't you just hold up the book for a minute so people know
Sure.
what we're ranting about here. Hold On World. Exploring John and Yoko's individual Plastic Ono Band records. This is a brand new book that Mr. Kruth here just wrote. So obviously, you know, John's not around to talk. Ringo's not going to do interviews. Did you try to approach Yoko? Did you attempt?
My experience with Yoko came in the mid 2000s when I was I had been living in Milwaukee because I had worked with Violent Femmes, and at that time there was an accidental murder of a young boy. Found a gun in his house and thought it was a toy and shot his brother and killed him. And so a number of people in town in Milwaukee, a guy named John Seeger, who had a band called Semi Twang, was a really cool guy, and Violent Femmes lived there, and De Kreutz and Bodines decided that we should do a benefit concert to raise consciousness and money. This was probably 1994, 93. And that was called Imagine No Handguns. And so I helped get involved in that and organize the concert and played some music. And there were a couple of funny things about it. We used a poster of the famous photograph of John from the White Album, and it was all in gold, and it was very cool. And it was the show was called Imagine No Handguns, and we heard from Yoko's lawyers to cease and persist of not using John's image.
Right. Right.
And it was like, oh, well, this is a little strange. We're trying to raise money for, vests and so that stuff like this won't happen in the future. And so I was,
So to fast sorry to
well, I mean,
forward to now, did you attempt to reach Yoko specifically?
No,
now
I didn't. And
okay.
I'll tell you why, because I had written 3 biographies before, beginning with Russ on Roland Kirk, whose wife, Dorthon, was very helpful and opened many doors for me. And then Janine Van Zant of Towns Van Zant's widow, who was also very helpful, but had a pretty firm hand on what was going on.
Sure.
And then when I wrote the Orbison book, everyone told me that Barbara Orbison was going to sue me into the woodwork and put a cease and desist on Chet Filippo, who I respected as a writer, who had been writing a biography of Roy Orbison, who told me himself, dude, you are barking up the wrong tree. You are looking for trouble. And then I just thought, I don't want anyone to control this book.
Well, okay. So you didn't. So you just thought better to just let it be. So.
Yeah, because in 2005, when we did those concerts, we had a little bit of agita from her, her lawyers, and then when they realized what we were doing, everything was cool.
Right.
So, no, I didn't want to. I tried to reach Sean, and then I started reaching out to people that knew them and played with them.
Mm-hmm. So who are some of the luminaries that you did talk to that have directly worked with John and Yoko? If obviously not on this specific album.
Well, I really tried to get Klaus.
Right.
I was trying to get hold of Klaus. That's who I wanted to get hold of. I had sent out a couple of notes to Dan Richter, who took the photograph on the cover and had helped them out. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of musicians that had played in the extended Plastic Ono Band over the years.
Right. So sort of when Yoko started doing shows again about a decade ago, you talked to some of those people then.
Right.
You checking your phone? Do you have a message or something? Or
no, I'm checking my list of people because I've written so many things since then that I hate to say that I'm
basically you talk to the 2000s era Plastic Ono Band members.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And people that had worked like Nels Klein.
Right. Sure.
And Dave Drywitz from Ween, who was a bass player who had worked with Yoko in Plastic Ono Band.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And basically those were the people that I talked with. Steve Shelley.
Right.
And
so for people who haven't read the book, which is most of these humans that have tuned in, so you kind of go through song by song.
Well, I do an introduction and I give a little history of their meeting, of course, and the mind games that they like to play together and where they came together as far as their intellect and their interests and all of that. Sure, I gave a major introduction. And also talking about Arthur Janoff, of course, and what primal therapy was, and their experience of coming to California, first in meeting Janoff over at Tittenhurst at their home in England, and the time that they spent together and that dynamic and what that was about. And then them coming to LA and taking the therapy with Janoff. So that was very important.
Yeah. Well, that sets up songs like Mother, obviously, and some of the other ones. One thing that's interesting about this album is you sort of almost forget that Phil Spector is the producer because it doesn't have any of the traditional Spector isms, string sections, 5 bass players, 16 trumpet players.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. Why don't we talk about that for a moment?
Well, the thing about Spector is I think that John, of course, always looked for protectors.
Mm-hmm.
The way that he looked towards Alan Klein as a protector, as and after having been produced by George Martin, though he did give George Martin a hard time quite a bit. I think that and I also think, he had worked with Spector, of course, on the earlier Plastic Ono Band singles.
Right.
And
right. There's a big difference between, let's say, the big sound of Instant Karma.
A big difference. And I think,
like I said, this is not a traditional Spector production at all.
Well, there was an advertisement, I believe it was in Billboard, in which John is saying, "Hey, Phil, we're starting the album this week, like, hey, where are you?" Mm-hmm. And so I really think that John wanted a fresh, stripped down, almost like, improvised kind of situation. That's how Klaus recalled it, where it was like you just get in there like a jazz musician or a blues musician, and you give it your all and you lay it down, and there it is, Mm-hmm. And look, I mean, Get Back was originally, Let It Be was originally supposed to be a stripped down session, but I think they found out that that's not always so easy to do. And mm-hmm. John really found that out with Working Class Hero, a 2-chord song where you would have thought he could have just played that A minor to G. And
what's funny about that song is it was only in recent years that I read an interview with somebody about how John had to recut like a few bars and then paste it back in. Right.
There were over something like 24 takes of it.
Right. But my point is the finished version
has an edit.
And I had never, ever heard that. I must have listened to that song 150 times. And then when someone said, hey, there's an edit in here where John replayed a few bars and then, glued it in.
I just want to get back to Phil for a second, and then I'll get on to that. So, Phil did such an incredible job with Instant Karma, and it was fast, and he laid it down, and it was like bam, and John loved this overall sound, and Phil didn't get in his way, but he did get a really great sound out of a lot of those a number of those singles that he was doing with John before they went in the studio. And I think that John probably felt vulnerable. He was always used to, having great people around, whether it was George Martin or whether, look, whatever he says about McCartney is a champion as far as sound and a musician and getting a great feel. Mm-hmm. And I think that, John was a pretty insecure guy, as we see on a number of levels. So I think that he probably needed, respected Spector. This is before it all went off the rails.
Right.
And and there was a funny bit in there where Phil's playing piano on one track and winds up on the other side of the glass, and John is in the studio and saying, see, now you know what it feels like.
Yeah, the other thing that obviously it was right there in the credits. The other thing, I really love the last song, God, for so many reasons, but realizing that Billy Preston is in there, right?
There's so many layers to that.
Right. When I think of God, I think of John at the piano, God as a concept by which we measure our pain, but some of the power comes from Preston, who I think.
Oh, yeah.
Completely. Yeah. Now, when Lennon died, about.
Do you want me to say something about that, or
about Billy? Yeah, go ahead and talk.
Well, okay, so you had to ask yourself: was this a crazy one of John's crazy jokes? I mean, here he is denying everything. He's just like it's Jesus, it's Elvis, it's Kings, it's magic, it's tarot, it's everything. And on the early versions, he just says, "I just believe in me." He doesn't even say, "I just believe in me, Yoko and me." He's just saying, "I just believe in me" on the earlier takes of the song. So, I mean, I'm sure that John was at a certain level of insecurity about his playing, but I'm also sure that, look, George had brought Billy by the studio, and it had been John's birthday, and George came in, and even though those guys had their dynamic at times where they were obviously not getting along, where John was taking swipes at George as he did on, I Found Out, and taking a shot at George for Hare Krishna and all of that, and saying he doesn't believe in Gita, and he doesn't believe in yoga, and he doesn't believe in all of the foundations, basic mantra, all the foundations of Eastern philosophy. Billy was all about God. He was just all, that's the way God planned it. And he was a gospel player, and that was his spirit, and that was his energy. And he played those beautiful little fills in there. I mean, the song is basically This Boy. It's the same thing. That 50s motif. And so you just got to ask yourself, is this some kind of like crazy far out joke of Lennon's that he's going to bring a gospel piano player in there and do all those, beautiful little fills over his playing? What was that about? I can't answer it. It's on too many levels.
Right. I about 5 years after Lennon was assassinated, Stevie Wonder did one of those classic Rolling Stone interviews, where they talk for hours. And Stevie said something I've never forgotten. He said, when I heard the lyric "God is a concept by which we measure our pain," I said to myself, this is Stevie Wonder talking, someone's going to hear this and not be able to deal with it, and then they're going to murder Lennon. Now, I'm not saying that's why David Chapman did, but there was something chilling about Stevie Wonder saying that even 5 or 6 years after Lennon was killed. It's just such a heavy line, right? I mean, it's
Prabhupada, who was the leader of the Hare Krishnas, apparently felt something about John. That, John was a really visceral guy. He was dealing with a lot of different energy. When you look at his early life and you see the problems that he had and all of the fighting and violence that was all in his background. I mean, you've got to thank Yoko for like really bringing him through it. But there was a lot of karma there, man. The way things are going, they're going to crucify me. I think, John had a little bit of
premonition.
It seems. I mean, we can certainly read into whatever we want. That's kind of the beauty of our job here, but also knowing where the trash can is and when is the right time to use it.
Yeah. I want to switch over to the Yoko album just because I don't want to get to the end and realize we haven't done that. So the Yoko album is done how long, like, after, like, give me the timeline between John's record and Yoko's record, if you know it.
Well, they were released the same day.
I know that. I'm talking about the recording.
Yoko's record, all this feminism and all this talk of like equality with women and all of that, that's all very nice. And John was learning that dance, and he was learning to walk the walk. He certainly learned how to talk at first, and then he started to learn to walk the walk. And what I'm getting to is that basically when John was finally through with recording his record, they made Yoko's in a day.
Well, they could have made it a full day because the personnel alone, right? I mean, Ornette Coleman didn't stop by.
Well, okay, that was an
it.
older recording. That was a practice tape, and in one of my interviews with Ornette, he was rather disgruntled and kind of groused about the way that tape was released. It was an it was a rehearsal tape from Royal Albert Hall when they played Royal Albert Hall, and he had heard Yoko, and he was intrigued with it, which is no surprise to me.
Sure,
I'm sure that Ornette was really aware of all kinds of far out singers like Abby Lincoln,
Patty Waters.
I'm sorry.
Patty Waters,
Abby Lincoln,
Linda Sharrock.
I was just going to say Linda Sharrock, and that album for sure, Hey Pocky Way or Monkey Pocky Monkey, what is it?
Pocky Poo, whatever. Yeah. So the entire Yoko album minus the Ornette song is done in one day.
Basically in one day. There was a track that they had of they had a number of different like recorded pieces like Birds and Trains and George Harrison's droning on a sitar that they just, put together. And there's something really incredible about that because, when you're working under the gun like that and you're really in the moment and you're getting things done like they've never been done, as they like to sing, you've got to hand it to him for that. But at the same point, maybe they could have given her a week, and of course, it's the same rhythm section, which was really great. And Yoko really, I think John's guitar playing.
For those who I'm just going to interrupt. So those who don't know, that the bass player is Klaus Vormann, most famous for doing, the Beatles
Manfred Mann.
Right. Famous for doing the Beatles Revolver album cover.
Sure.
He's also
and today was the release day of Revolver.
Right. He's also sort of doing that rumbling opening bass line to Carly Simon's "You're So Vain." A lot of people forget that he did that. And the drummer, of course, is Ringo Starr.
And really cutting loose, much more than he could with the Beatles, and more than he could on John's record. There's some really great drumming by Ringo on that album. The opening track of that record, Why, is one of my favorite tracks.
Right. And you're hearing elements of what later became krautrock on there, right? I mean, that's just such a cutting edge.
Krautrock, punk.
Yeah, right. Everything.
Yeah, I mean, the experimental aspect and quality of that record is what is going to keep that music fresh forever. Right. In some crazy ways, I would say that music is going to remain, and I'm walking out on a limb here, folks. Some of the music on that record is going to remain fresh in the future, long after certain Beatle tracks, long after certain John Lennon tracks. And that's what I hear in it, and that's what I feel about it.
This is like the beginning of a good Facebook argument.
Put them up, Patty.
We should post that, and then people can just rant on that all day. One thing that I just found out is a few years ago, I knew that Secretly Canadian had reissued the Yoko album on CD. What I didn't realize is that it has a handful of outtakes that aren't available anywhere else. So if you really want to nerd out on the Yoko Plastic Ono Band record, seek out the Secret Canadian CD version. Right. 3 or 4 years ago, and there's some extra goodies on there. Not just this sort of aggressive, vibrant music, but also some great acoustic guitar.
Oh yeah,
it's okay. So that can be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean the choices of the things that they put on Life with the Lions. I think there were a couple of other tracks that came out later on, and I was always really convinced that if Yoko had if they had released a couple of those tracks where she's really singing very sweet and very gently with John kind of finger picking a very Dear Prudence Julia kind of light guitar, we would have maybe had a chance or more of a feeling that, oh, it's not just this really aggressive, screaming, heavy kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, there's like songs like "Listen, the Snow is Falling,"
just gorgeous, right?
Gentle, folkier side of
right, which I think is just beautiful and gorgeous.
Right. Yep. Questions have been sort of flowing through on Ask a Question. Let's just kind of go through here a little bit.
Sure.
We already addressed Yoko did not do the interview. John, you're a legend. Yes, John is a legend. He did not talk to Alan White. Did you try to?
I quoted Alan White. Everything was there that I needed. Everything was really there. And sometimes when you hear these interviews years later, I'm sorry, I enjoyed most of McCartney 3-2-1, but there were some places in watching that where it's like, okay, we've heard this story many, many times, and we've even heard it better. So it's like, I really think it's my job. It's my job to really take what's there and make a great crazy quilt out of it and make it and breathe new life into it with the hindsight that we are now, that we now have.
Right.
To be able to contextualize this stuff, and it becomes like a clay. It becomes your material, and it's really how you use it.
This is kind of a whack. I'm going to throw this question out to everybody, or specifically John, because it's kind of cool and a little offbeat. Any thoughts on National Lampoon's Magical Misery Genius's Pain parody?
Oh, God. Well, I was telling you that I was doing these shows called Imagine No Handguns in New York. And that's when I got this kind of thing from Yoko's lawyers and everything. And I wrote a note, and I had gotten a letter from Michael Bloomberg thanking us for doing these concerts. And we sent that to Yoko's lawyers. And then in return, we got like about 200 Imagine Peace buttons, posters, and copies of Grapefruit.
Nice.
And to give to all the performers. So, okay, Sean didn't come down. She didn't come down.
Yeah.
But that's when Hal Wilner came and performed Michael O'Donoghue's absolutely scathing tragical misery tour. That's what it was called in National Lampoon. Now, here was a night that was dedicated to John, basically, and his music. And at the same point, I think John Lennon had a pretty good sense of humor, don't you, Pat?
Well, I'll say this. He okay, National Lampoon's taking a little pot shot on him, but, listen to, like, just before he died, he does this parody of Bob Dylan, Serve Yourself, vamping off.
That was something.
In other words, obviously John died tragically, but he didn't hesitate to shit on anybody that he felt like shitting on. So therefore, shit flows in both directions.
Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
And so, we did that when we did the live show. Wilner wanted to do Tragical History Tour. I was like, hit it, man. And so, we're not afraid of that. I don't think that I coddle either one of them. In fact, I felt that perhaps the most radical thing that I could do was really be supportive of where I felt supportive of Yoko's music and art and what she taught John and the influence that she had on John. So, there's a certain level of radical streak that runs through all of this music, whether it's John's or Yoko's. and what they did together. And I felt like, okay, maybe some people are going to read half this book and then and not even look at the second half of the book.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that's sort of groundbreaking about John's Plastic Ono Band is the sort of lo-fi quality of My Mummy's Dead. Right? Like nobody was really, it's in the 80s or 90s, it would have been considered, a home Porta Studio type recording, but just capturing this sound. I mean, the first time I heard the album, besides the fact that that song is so poignant because his mother is dead, but just regardless of the lyrics or what it's about,
Three Blind Mice,
just a little lo-fi, just that lo-fi quality, very, very interesting.
The other thing that's really amazing about this is when you see, I did this album with bootlegs. I did this book with bootlegs before this whole package got re-released.
Yeah, let's talk about the big box set a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I've been collecting bootlegs at at flea markets on CDs or records or wherever I could find them. Mm-hmm. And I had already heard an awful lot of the stuff that came out on the big box set. I mean, the photography and the way it was packaged was really beautiful and all of that. But I had heard most of that material before. Wilner had an awful lot of it. Mm-hmm. And so what you found out was, even though the album comes off really stark and stern and grim and really hard, and there's a lot of stories about John admonishing his father and taking his father apart before he even goes into the studio to record one on his birthday. The whole story of his birthday was really kind of stunning, because he was in the studio on his birthday when George comes in and says hello. And but he had just taken his father apart that day and told him that he never wanted to see him again, and he was like, his father thought he was going to murder him. Uh-huh. But the sessions were nothing like what you get on the album. There are a lot of outtakes where they're jamming on Carl Perkins songs and old just old tunes that they were doing even before the Beatles. There's a track called Long Lost John, which was a skiffle tune that John used to, that they used to do with the Quarrymen. That's on the outtakes. So it wasn't this really dark, grim thing. John had something that he had to get off his chest. And Klaus Voormann said a number of times, from all the different research that I found, it was like you just went in and John laid it down. It was like a jazz record or a blues record. It's like, here it comes, your body surfing, catch the wave and carry it, and it carries you.
Right. Yep. If other people have questions, why don't you throw them into the ask a question box?
Sure.
We've kind of answered most of them that are already in there. Go out there in TV land. Here's a question James Mills asked. Would you say that despite the spontaneous vibe of the album, Lennon always had a sense of craft? He, for example, dropping in a few bars of Working Class Hero, crafting a tasty Hendrix-like guitar part on Hold On John, refining his vocal approach.
I think that it was a pretty challenging session for him in a lot of ways. I think that, like, what they discovered with Get Back or Let It Be was, these guys weren't working musicians. They weren't out doing it, 3, 4, 5 nights a week anymore. And I think that there was a lot of frustration there. There's stories about him, kicking over microphone stands during making during Working Class Hero. It took him a lot of takes. I don't know if that was necessarily craft that you would call it. I think he was just trying to get through it. And John was always a primitive, always liked it, hard and fast and raw. And though, when you hear his guitar playing on Hold On John, Hold On World, oh my God, it's so beautiful. It had that lyrical quality that you heard on like Don't Let Me Down. And I love John as a guitar player, one of my favorite guitar players, but I don't know about John as a craftsman. I think he was anti-craft at this point. It was almost like how punk was, or anti-folk. The anti-folk guys that I used to know around the village, man, they were just like, they were not going to strum that acoustic guitar like butter at all,
Susan had some good questions there. Was there anything you were hoping to learn and share that you weren't able to quite get your hands around? What was the most satisfying part of the process? What do you personally like about your own book now that it's done?
The process for me was really fantastic in that I interviewed certain people that I would think about their music, like Peter Case. I would think about their music and I would think, I bet Peter Case was really inspired by this. And then to talk with Peter and then to find out that we both went to Syracuse, New York to see the This Is Not Here show of Yoko's in 1970, 71. So there were times when I was having conversations with Nels Cline or Steve Shelley, and their perspective on this and the way that it affected them, because it was like going, oh, I wasn't alone. So that was really kind of great. Writing about Yoko's early years was really fascinating for me. That was writing about Yoko in this book was really, allowed me to step outside the rock biography kind of. Not that I wrote that many rock biographies. I wrote about Townes Van Zandt and Russ Unrolling Kirk and all of that. But as a music writer, it allowed me to dive into Dadaism, John Cage,
Right. Why don't you, since we've been ranting for a while, just hold the book up again, because this is John's book. It's called Hold On World. There's a little green button at the bottom of the screen if you want to support Book Soup. Book Soup, for those who don't know,
sure you do,
is a wonderful independent bookstore in the heart of LA. I realize, yes, the book is probably a few dollars cheaper on Amazon, but go ahead and hit the button and consider
Amazon-B, you mean?
Yes, consider paying a few more dollars more. It's not that expensive. It's a soft cover book. What haven't we? I'm throwing questions at you. What more do you want to say about this, John? Some other.
Well, are there any other questions?
Well, let me scroll down here. Occasionally, another one pops in. I
just love the way that Yoko's mind worked. I loved Grapefruit.
Yeah.
I loved Grapefruit. I had been interested in Zen. I had been interested in Paul Reps, who was a great Zen poet. I was interested in poetry. When I saw her work at the retrospective in Syracuse, it was like all household items and furniture that was all painted white and then cut in half, rendered useless. Right. And I totally immediately understood what John was seeing in her, because she was she was sparking John's mind like nobody else. I mean, he had already been influenced by Dylan, of course. There was a certain thing with the Stones that he might never have admitted he was influenced by or admired. Their grungy, bluesy, raw thing that he himself had as well. And one of the main things in the book, one of the main points in the book is Stu Sutcliffe and Astrid Kircher. And how they kind of laid down a blueprint, a map for him back in the early days in Germany. When he saw Astrid Kircher and he saw Stu, who was a painter, who was the cool guy in the band, by the way, at that time in certain ways. I mean, John loved Stu because he was this hip art student friend of his. And he saw that you could have an equal relationship with a woman, that she could be creative and you could not only be making love to her, but collaborate with her artistically. And on top of it, she was taboo. Right. She was a German chick 15 years after World War II.
Right.
Now tell me that this was not a seed that wasn't planted in his head.
Right.
John loved to push people's buttons. So here was this Japanese woman who was like dealing in poetry, in concepts and mind games and all of these things that he found so fascinating. And she was exotic. She was Japanese.
Right. Actually, someone just threw a question here because we haven't really talked about it, which is the album cover photos. There's they're some very similar photos. First it's John and Yoko, then it's Yoko and John.
Right.
Is the tree still there? Do we know anything about that photo?
I don't know. I've never been at Chittenhurst. I'd love to go.
Right. Do we know anything about the baby pictures on the back?
Well, the thing that was really interesting about the baby pictures on the back is that came long before in the 80s when all of a sudden everybody was putting baby pictures on their records. I thought that was an interesting little take. There was a period of time there in the late 70s, early 80s when all of a sudden baby pictures started showing up.
I'm not doubting that, but what album specifically you were thinking of? I can't think of any baby pictures.
It's just not coming to mind right off the top, but boy, I remember it in real time. As when these records were coming out, all of a sudden there were like a lot of baby pictures. If somebody can help us with that, that would be great. But that was Dan Richter, who was their assistant. And Dan was a really interesting guy, has an amazing story himself, was involved in mime and was the monkey and led the Monkees in 2001 Space Odyssey. So he worked with Stanley Kubrick and John and Yoko and was, around. And I love how those are very calm photographs. They're like that moment of peace underneath the big tree, right?
Yeah, no, it's a very gentle, organic, outdoorsy photo.
Right.
Which kind of goes against the grain and yet complements the grain of what's inside.
Absolutely.
Right.
So there's some beautiful, gentle moments on John's Plastic Ono Band for sure. Even on Yoko's, there's some really it's not all tearing your face off kind of stuff,
Anyone else here want to throw a photo? Well, here's our host. She's back.
We have time for one more question.
One more question. Go to ask a question, folks. I will spin the wheel. Maybe your question will be the one I pick. It'll only be one question. What will it be? Has anyone? No one has written anything.
Well, what about the haircuts?
Oh yeah. So
what about the haircut?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So John Yoko both get these radical haircuts. They John shaves off his beard, his long hair. Yoko does the same.
He didn't shave off his beard. He kept the beard.
Oh, did he keep the beard?
There's the beard.
Okay.
And,
You
see him in the Annie Leibovitz photograph in the overalls, because you see him as the working class hero, and he's in the cover of Rolling Stone. He's got the beard, and he's got the beard
missing when there's these famous photos from Denmark, because they go to Denmark to track down Tony Cox, and they've shaven it, and I think he's beardless there. Not to overly nerd out here, but anyway, the haircuts.
And it was given to the hair was given away to a very radical Michael X, who very radical guy who was a black, very political kind of guy, which kind of shows where it was all headed. And they gave the hair away to be auctioned to support what was going on in London at the time, a very radical kind of scene that was happening.
Yeah, when John sings "The Freaks on the Phone Won't Leave Me Alone," that is a dig at Michael X. He adored Michael X. He gave Michael X a lot of money. Michael X was not a Black Panther, but a similar type of British equivalent. But he was also annoyed, as much as he admired Michael and gave money, he was also annoyed to keep getting phone calls saying he got more money. Michael X, unfortunately, did murder some people in the mid-'70s and was killed. But Michael X was, at the time, a revered Black political activist in London.
It was just very truthful, very raw. As you were saying early on, there were not too many albums that ever had this kind of impact. Maybe Lou Reed's Berlin, for the people that were following Lou at that point. Maybe certainly Blood on the Tracks.
Very Blood on the Tracks,
And Lou Reed's New York later on. Maybe Tonight's the Night.
Yeah,
Neil Young at his most horrific.
Yeah, sure. Big Star Third.
This is very truthful, straight ahead stuff. And after, I think, sharing the sonic stage with McCartney, I think he needed to just really strip it down and get back.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're going to bring it back to Book Soup here for a moment.
Thank you. That's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you again to our guests and to everyone who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate your time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore, Book Soup.
Please do.
And our authors, and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads "Hold On World" directly below the viewer screen. Again, it might be a couple extra dollars, but all of those dollars go to a really good cause. If you
you're not supporting the guy shooting that guy off in outer space, are you?
Group is building a rocket, but I think that's just a myth. Yeah.
No, I mean, sometimes we have free donuts in the lounge, but besides that, I don't think we have very many much frivolity.
Cut back.
I actually have a question for Book Soup, which is, I believe this thing is archived, and so people could come and watch it later. Is that true?
Yes, you can come back to the same link and watch the whole thing.
Okay.
If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening, and please.
Oh, somebody asked if I have another book planned. Can I mention that?
Just very quick, yes.
Yes, 1 second.
Okay. Dark Side of the Moon, a book called Lunacy, which is really turning that all upside down.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Book Soup.
Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Please stay safe.
You too. Thank you so much, Book Soup.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.